You'll take the high road, and I'll take the low road, and I'll be in Scotland afore ye. But me and my true love will never meet again on the bonny, bonny banks o' Loch Lomond. Welcome to the Voice of Reason. This week, President Trump having an extraordinary trip to none other than Scotland and the United Kingdom after meeting with the European Union President and the UK Prime Minister, also the Prime Minister of Scotland. Such an extraordinary meeting of the minds to make key new trade deals between the European Union, and President Trump having some extraordinary time opening up Trump International Scotland, a course that will be host to many great professional tournaments and also for the world to enjoy the game of golf, really showcasing the most beautiful 36 holes of golf in all of the world at the home of golf. $750 billion in energy agreements between the European Union and the United States. $600 billion, in fact, coming into the United States through this new trade agreement. But, Mr. Director, something has been very perplexing and on my mind over the course of the last several weeks of this news cycle. And the deep state, the uniparty, the League of Shadows, as we aptly name it here on the Voice of Reason, the globalist mindset really coming into focus on a countless number of items, but especially with the Federal Bureau of Investigations. It was none other than the great Bill O'Reilly who really broke it down over the course of this week with specific facts that we know, regardless of where you stand on various issues in the news cycle. These are undisputed facts that are out there and must be answered by those who are in power. People like Attorney General Merrick Garland and former FBI Director Christopher Wray and Gina Haspel, someone who has been an architect of foreign wars as the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, someone who was a huge architect in shaping the destruction of Iraq and that American invasion, which led to countless loss of lives in our own military and also maiming so many of our brave service members who went there voluntarily. So let's look at the facts as everything stands right now. The FBI knowingly used false information to secure FISA warrants to spy on the Trump campaign in the Russia collusion hysteria in 2016. And now with over 200 pages of documents, thanks to DNI Chief Tulsi Gabbard, this information can be studied and looked at. And we know that Barack Hussein Obama, his comrades, John Brennan, James Comey, crooked Hillary Clinton, the autopen, Joe Biden, among others, they're in on this Spygate, which it is. Whether it's Crossfire, Hurricane, the Steele dossier, this was all plotted and weaponized in order to usurp the authority of a duly elected citizen president, Donald Trump, and his campaign. We know the Clinton campaign spied on the Trump Tower. These are simple facts. With FBI corruption, there are FBI agents who suggested to Twitter and other social media companies that the Hunter Biden laptop story was foreign disinformation and should be suppressed. This is on the heels of President Trump being thrown off of different social media sites, including Facebook and then Twitter. It's one of the reasons yours truly went to work for Truth Social, in order to bring free speech back to the internet, in order to restore the voice of a then former president, Donald Trump, so his voice could be heard, because he was gearing up to become a candidate for president once again. And we know because of your due diligence, of your patriotism, you put him back in the Oval Office. That Hunter Biden story, in fact, becoming true. This is all while the FBI at the top of the upper echelon James Comey and company, Director Wray as well, amongst others, perpetuating a narrative of these so-called Russian golden showers. They were saying that was credible, but not what was taking place behind the scenes in the Obama administration with Crossfire Hurricane and Russia, and the Steele dossier, and going after low-level players in the Trump campaign. George Papadopoulos, his life was ruined in the process. Carter Page. These people, their lives completely changed and upended, and harassment coming from the top levels of our intelligence agency. Another fact, the FBI itself suppressed intel that there would be trouble on January 6th. Agents received this information and, as far as we can tell, did nothing with it, did not inform the public on what took place regarding January 6th. Here's another question. Where in the hell is Ray Epps? Where are the people that were federal agents who were on that ground, who even Christopher Wray later admitted to that, agents that are designed to upend foreign governments? They were weaponized against the United States on January 6th. Very disturbing pattern of behavior by our Federal Bureau of Investigation, who suppressed the information from a paid informant that, as vice president, Joe Biden, the autopen himself, took money from his son and brother. The information was put in a memorandum, but when Congress asked to see it, Christopher Wray said no, and only relented under the threat of contempt of Congress. And this was right after the gymnast, the very famous American gymnast, who testified on the fact that the Indianapolis field office failed in the investigation of literal child abuse that took place at U.S. Gymnastics. And who was in the third row of that, looking very nervous, very coy? None other than Christopher Wray, the former director of the FBI. Why isn't Merrick Garland being questioned about this? He was Attorney General. He's technically Christopher Wray's boss during the Biden administration. Why isn't he being prosecuted for this? All very valid questions as we get more and more information. Now, the FBI also spied on Catholic pro-life activists. That operation was out of the Richmond, Virginia field office, and now the FBI refuses to turn over the records of that operation to the public. This is just after they sent some of their agents in, not only to interrogate people at their homes, but into school board meetings, or parents were simply asking the questions of their duly elected school boards. Why do you have pornography in my student's library? My minor student, whether it be high school, middle school, elementary school. The FBI has to answer these questions. They also declined to investigate the rioters who crossed state lines in the George Floyd demonstrations in 2020. And we know just now, we saw this recently with the paid actors. I can't even call them activists because I respect an activist. I respect someone who will stand up, who will even put a suit on and speak their due diligence, guaranteed to them by the Constitution, whether or not I agree with them, especially when it comes to elected officials that represent them. They are their employer. Sometimes politicians forget about that. But they did this to people like Martin Luther King, who stood for civil rights, who stood for life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, to fully see what the founding documents guaranteed in this country. There was a file on him. There's a long history of this, and now it's starting to be uncovered, unraveled, the curtain pulled back, truly, for all of you to see. And here on The Voice of Reason, we'll dive right into that, as CIA Director John Ratcliffe of this recording will be promised, in fact, to release more and more documents, declassifying them, regarding the Russia hoax and the deep state intel community that Andrew McCabe, the former deputy at the FBI, says, oh, that's just a difference of opinion on intelligence. But interesting, it's a difference of opinion because some of those opinions lead to people being prosecuted, fingerprinted at the Fulton County Jail, in fact, along with potential collusion between a DA in Georgia and the White House, We know that many of these DAs, these attorneys general, meeting with the auto pen in order to see what they can find. They campaigned on getting Trump. That was their goal. And now we have an FBI that clearly has a history of corruption. So where's Merrick Garland? Where's Christopher Wray? Where's Gina Haspel? All of these people need to be subpoenaed by Congress and questioned immediately. And we need to get to the bottom of this. Is the deputy of the FBI right now, Dan Bongino, him and Kash Patel, I feel like, including Pam Bondi at the AG, all up against an impossible situation, considering the mess they inherited from the top. But in an interview with our friend Tucker Carlson, Deputy FBI Director Dan Bongino stating that this is layered incompetence with intent. Layered incompetence is intent. So let's take an example. If someone goes out and drinks 10 light beers, they do a couple of picklebacks. It's a whiskey with pickle juice. They then go on and have a couple of more hard drinks, and then to top it all off, they're just enjoying a night of drinking, whether it be with friends or whatever they're celebrating or whatever they're trying to forget. We wish them well, but it's their choice to then get in that car and to drive that vehicle from behind the wheel. It may not be their intent to then hit someone else and take another life in that process, but do you see the lack of preparation then led to layered incompetence, and that therefore is intent. That's the letter of the law. That's the same case here. That's truly comparing apples to apples. Because it's easy for some of these intelligence spies and chiefs to say, oh, that's just simply a disagreement on intelligence. No, layered incompetence, Andrew McCabe, is intent. Just what were you and James Comey intending to do prior to the 2016 election, during the 2016 election, and after the 2016 election? Because your former boss took the time to somehow strike a pose with seashells saying 86-47. That means eliminate or it's gone, to the 47th president of the United States. That's a threat. For some reason, if it's Donald Trump in Butler, we find a way to forget about it. We find a way to forget that the fact that 6 Secret Service agents now have been suspended because of their actions or their lack of actions. And then you have another situation where we here on the Voice of Reason believe all political violence is unacceptable, period, right, left, center, wherever it might go. But if the former vice president, if anything like that happened to her, and thank God that did not, you would not hear the end of it from legacy media. There'd be a national mourning on a daily basis while she's still alive, claiming that Republicans were responsible for this, that people on the right were responsible for this, when it could not be further from the truth. So those are the facts we know, and we here at the Voice of Reason stand behind this cabinet, this president, Tulsi Gabbard, at DNI, the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, the CIA Director, John Ratcliffe, and FBI Director, Kash Patel, and his deputy, Dan Bongino, as they get to the bottom of this deep state cabal that truly sought, without a question, to usurp the executive authority of the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and even before he took that oath of office, to embarrass him and remove him somehow. They tried lawfare. They tried impeachments. They tried assassination attempts. What will they try next? That's why it's up to us, the American people, to remain vigilant in this great battle. You're born for such a time as this. We are joined by extraordinary guests tonight on The Voice of Reason. Mark Meckler is the co-founder of Conventions of States Action, and we dive into the necessary need for the Electoral College in 2025 and why Amazon, for some reason, is running a documentary series committed to spreading falsehoods about this great convention and this great organization. We are also joined by Chloe Castillo, the artist series here on The Voice of Reason. She's America's Pianist, and she'll tell us more about a great event coming up on Friday, August 8th, something you should attend if you'll be in New York for the Great Artist Series. We look forward to those discussions tonight on The Voice of Reason. And welcome to The Voice of Reason. Mark Meckler, the president of the Convention of States. Very interesting to see, Mark, that Amazon now attacking with one of its documentaries this very idea of coming together to make our constitutional republic an even better place to live.
Yeah, it was kind of a shocking thing to find out about last week. I had no idea this was going on. They certainly didn't approach anybody from our organization. But I was actually told by somebody in the White House that this existed. They pointed me to the clip. And for some reason, they've decided this is the great threat to our Constitution. They're actually attempting to use constitutional process.
Now, why is it so important to not only call for a convention like this, but our federalist system in the constitutional apparatus of our great country? In other words, states' rights and the fact that we have laboratories of democracy, 50 states, 6 territories, so that the federal government can look and say, oh, wow, that's actually a great idea. And you could point to several examples of this in our nearly 250-year history.
Yeah, look, this clause in Article 5 was put in there during the convention in 1787 because the states understood that eventually the federal government would become tyrannical and try to override the people's will. And they wanted the states to have the opportunity to rise up peacefully, actually, just by calling a convention, gathering, and proposing amendments to restrain federal tyranny. And I think that what's going on, why we're seeing this make its way into the mainstream culture through this Amazon Prime documentary, is that the left, the radical left, is afraid of this. They are inherently statist. They don't like the idea of federalism. They want to be able to control everything from the top down. So the idea of dispersing power around the country to all 50 states is something they're inherently opposed to.
And why do you think that is? Is it because of this globalist uniparty movement? Is it simply a structure of control? Is it making money? Or is it a refusal just simply not to look on the other side, even if there is, a valid point of disagreement?
Yeah, I actually think it's all of the above. I mean, everything you described is part of this system now where the federal government has grown beyond its constitutional boundaries. The framers knew this would happen. And the reason they knew it would happen is it's not that they had a crystal ball. They understood human nature. This is what human beings do. They conglomerate power to themselves. When they get power, they want more power. That's just human nature, like I said. And so they provided this relief mechanism to blow us out of a situation like this. And I do believe that there are globalists involved that don't want this to happen. People like the Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Chamber of Commerce wouldn't want this to happen. Any big organizations that derive their power from lobbying in Washington, D.C., it becomes more difficult for them if the power is dispersed to the state legislatures.
And they call it shiny, happy people. It's almost as if they're talking down to us.
Yeah. Look, and the reason for that title, this is a documentary show, apparently. I just found this out in the last week. I was unfamiliar. It's their #1 documentary show. It started last year. Their first season was an expose on a Christian family by the name of the Duggar family. And there were some very serious allegations and charges, I think even convictions of child abuse in that family. And so this family was elevated by Amazon in order to attack Christians. This is the main purpose of the show, as far as I can tell, to paint with a broad brush anybody who does anything bad. The second season has nothing to do with the Duggar family. It's about a Christian camp back in the 90s, a teen camp, part of the Christian evangelical movement that they're attacking. I'm unfamiliar with the camp or the movement. And the odd part is that they just kind of plop Convention of States down in the middle of this. We have nothing to do with this teen camp. Convention of States didn't exist in the 90s, but they just sort of throw this out gratuitously in a 3-minute segment attacking Convention of States.
And tell us more about the Convention of States for viewers who might not be familiar with it. What are some of the goals, and ultimately, what are you seeking to do as the president of the organization to bring that sound Bill of Rights, common sense, and the framers' vision into 2025?
So, Article 5 of the Constitution contains the ways in which we're allowed to amend our Constitution. One way is when Congress proposes an amendment, takes two-thirds of both houses, and that's how we've gotten all of our amendments. The second way is when the states decide to gather in convention. It takes two-thirds of the states, or 34 states, to call for that convention. So far, 19 have done so. When we reach that 34 state threshold, the states will gather, and what they'll discuss is amendments that would control the federal government fiscally. In other words, impose potentially a balanced budget amendment, tax caps, spending caps, things like that. Second would be anything that would impose term limits, not just on Congress, but it could be on the bureaucrats and the staffers in the DC, what we now know as the deep state. And third is anything that would take and limit the scope, power, or jurisdiction of the federal government, return that scope, power, and jurisdiction to the people in the states. So these are things that the vast majority of Americans support. They're very common sense. They're not partisan. They would return an equal amount of power to any state, whether you're talking about New York or Texas. So this is something that all Americans should support.
Now, is there any fear if this convention would be called and then big government items would get into it? So say that some of the delegates there might look at Washington, D.C. and say, oh, it's not centralized enough. Let's even grow it some more. Is there a possibility of that happening?
I think there is fear, and that fear has been imposed by the radical left in America. Over 250 leftist groups from Planned Parenthood to La Raza and MoveOn.org have signed a press release against what we're doing. But the reality is, by the terms of the convention itself and the applications made by the state, the only things they can talk about are things that limit the scope, power, and jurisdiction of the federal government, impose fiscal restraints, or impose term limits on Washington, D.C. So it is a very limited agenda that could be discussed at the convention.
And how is there a way to counter this Amazon documentary? Is it something that could be produced by, say, a right of center organization, or maybe something at the Convention of States to actually showcase, if that does call into convention at the time, what's actually happening there, and that it has nothing to do with, this Christian camp that may have been left, right, or center back in the 90s, well before this movement was organized?
Yeah, I think it's very hard for folks on the right to strike at the heart of mainstream culture. And really, honestly, we don't feel a need to counter this. Actually, I think this was excellent for our organization. It brought attention to the idea of a convention of states to mainstream, what I would describe as Hollywood left America, people who might not know about this at all. So we're pretty happy with it. The folks who support convention of states found a lot of humor in it and actually really enjoyed it.
It's a really good point, Mark, because it reminds me of the Book of Mormon, the musical. It's produced by the South Park creators. And I noticed going to see that show that the Mormon Church, the Latter-day Saints, put together ads and said, if you have questions, come see us. It was a brilliant, masterful marketing that took place. And in many times, it's almost name ID for the other side or someone you're trying to humiliate or put down. And in the process, well, why not come see what we're all about? And then in return, Americans become curious about this rather extraordinary movement.
Yeah, and I think this is really important for folks on the right to understand that the left has lost a large part of its cultural sway. And when they attack us, one of the things that it does is it shows us that we're definitely over the target. So for our 5 million plus folks out there across the country, for people that were watching on social media who are conservatives, they're looking at this and thinking, well, if the left is attacking this, maybe it's something I ought to take a look at.
And you have some very big endorsements coming from the Vice President, the House Speaker, and some others who are looking to maybe get this going and actually have, again, power returning back to the states as it was originally intended.
Yeah, we've been incredibly blessed over the years. I mean, in this administration, as you said, we have J.D. Vance, we have Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins, Mike Huckabee, who is now the ambassador to Israel, Caroline Leavitt, I think the best press secretary in modern history. All of these folks came into the administration already supporting Convention of States. So we have a very broad and deep bench of Convention of States supporters that are well known to the American public.
So as you try to reach that 34 state threshold, first, can you share how that might happen, the process of getting to that point, but also Do you believe that maybe getting some of these agencies out into America away from K Street can kind of break up the lobbying firms in order for these cabinet secretaries, which many of them, it's impressive because not only subject matter experts in bringing common sense back to government, but they've been governors, they've been in media, they know the departments they're dealing with, so they're bringing that Main Street to K Street. But would it not be nice to see, say, the Department of Agriculture in somewhere like South Dakota or Texas and start getting these agencies out into what I like to call real America?
Yeah, I really appreciate that effort being taken by the Trump administration. I know the USDA just laid off a bunch of people and they're going to move a bunch of their offices out around the country. I know that's been done during the first Trump administration with the Department of the Interior. And I think that is a very healthy thing for the United States of America. The people who make these decisions should be living in the areas that are most affected by these decisions. But this is a really important caveat to all of that. I'm afraid that post-Trump administration, if we have another leftist administration, which our politics swing back and forth, eventually we will, that they'll just reconsolidate those agencies in Washington, D.C., and they'll grow them more than ever before. And this is one of the reasons I think calling a convention of states is so necessary. I'll give you a specific example. President Trump has talked about doing away with the Department of Education. I know he and the secretary are working very hard to do that. Even if they get it done, the next time there's a Democrat administration, they'll just re-up that Department of Education. We want to make that permanently constitutionally impossible. The Constitution should have language in it that prohibits the federal government from being involved in our education system in any way. And if we do that, that's how you put the lid on this forever.
We know that President Reagan stated that before as it was his goal post-Carter administration and something that they could not achieve, that the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government program. And countless things that were supposed to be temporary, gosh, really since 1913, this modern progressive movement and the implementation of the federal income tax leading to Social Security and other so-called safety nets that have now been a big doom and gloom umbrella over our constitutional foundation. And now I find this very interesting as well, Mark. Most of the states, have they not somewhat adopted either term limits, a balanced budget amendment? Many of these legislators have to go there for a short period of time and actually produce a balanced budget. And you have those amendments in state constitutions. So it seems as if these laboratories of democracy, they end up getting it right, while our federal government, now $36 trillion in debt and counting, with the average American owing nearly $110,000 per the debt, and that includes people under 18.
Yeah, the vast majority of states have figured out a lot of this stuff. And there are simple things, and we're talking about the big things like a balanced budget amendment or term limits. There are very simple things that are supported by the American people. For example, most states have something either constitutionally or by statute called a single subject amendment or a single subject rule that says you can't have these 2,000-page bills. They have single subject bills that are put out there for an up or down vote. That's the way our federal government should operate, and we could pass a single subject amendment. Another one is our Supreme Court. People are nervous about the idea of packing the Supreme Court. The left has said they will absolutely do this if they take power again. They will do away with the filibuster. They'll pack the Supreme Court. Well, we could, I think, easily pass an amendment to limit the Supreme Court to 9. Another subject that's pretty hot right now is the idea of anchor babies under the 14th Amendment. Clearly, the 14th Amendment was not meant to allow people to just come in, have a baby, and that baby is automatically a citizen. And we can clarify that through an amendment, which would be supported by the vast majority of Americans.
So interesting to dive deep into these issues. I'm curious as well, Mark, with your background, not only in the Convention of States and also the Tea Party Patriots, what are your thoughts on the One Big Beautiful Bill? Because we saw a lot of good there. There were some concerns about how large it was, but now you start seeing rescissions happening, and specifically with the $9 billion regarding PBS, NPR, and public funding of truly state media. And when I grew up, it was Sesame Street teaching you the basics, the ABCs, the golden rule, how to treat one another. Now it's transgender story hour. How's your approach to, or your grade more or less, regarding Republicans' approach to legislation in this golden era?
Yeah, if I were to give it a grade, I'd give it a solid B, and especially for effort. Look, I just don't think they could have gotten anything else done in this era of such a slim majority. I just think it's very difficult, and people have to understand threading the needle in the way that Speaker Johnson did and Leader Thune, I think is really incredible. I'm a big supporter of especially Mike Johnson. I think he's the most conservative speaker to hold the gavel in my lifetime, but they could only do so much. I don't think bills can be big and beautiful. So I think this one was big and not so beautiful, but I also think the best we could expect under the circumstances. I also want to say, I think this is the best reason we need a convention of states. When you look, we have control over all three branches of government, alleged conservatives, and this is the best we can get. This is why the people need to intervene.
Mark Meckler, the president of Convention of States. Sir, where can people help support the effort, and what are you looking to achieve in the next or the rest of the year? Let's look to the end of it, and where can people help support this great cause?
Yeah, people can go to conventionofstates.com and get signed up to support the cause. They can follow me on X at Mark Meckler. And I expect that we're going to pass a couple more states by the end of the year. I'm looking forward to North Carolina and perhaps Ohio. Those are probably the two on my most up-and-coming target list.
Very exciting. And before we part, is it really a Republican or Democrat issue? What are you finding out there as you break bread with everyone wanting to bring constitutional common sense back to our great republic?
We've polled this nationally, and it's over 2/3 of people. It doesn't matter what state we're in. It doesn't matter what party we're talking about. When you explain to people what we're trying to do, they realize it's a nonpartisan effort, and they're engaged.
Please join us again on The Voice of Reason. Mark Meckler with the Convention of States. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you to Mark Meckler for joining us on The Voice of Reason, the Convention of States action, something that is endorsed by Vice President J.D. Vance and also Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, as well as countless state and local leaders. Time for our federal government to live under the authority of the Constitution, and now we are returning to those constitutional times and those breakdowns of what is proper in Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3, and God willing, we can bring down some of this $36 trillion of debt. That's roughly $110,000 of debt that each person owes because of the incompetence of the uniparty. It's people who are not able to vote yet, including minors in this country. $110,000 each, roughly. I'm sure that you can add that into your budget, right? It's unbelievable, Mr. Director, how some of these federal politicians without term limits spend. They're worse than drunken sailors, as the late Senator John McCain once put it. Now for a lighthearted segment and also to showcase the artist series, we have Chloe Castillo, America's Pianist, who has a very special event in New York upcoming on Friday, August 8th. You should attend if you can. Here's our discussion with Miss Chloe. Welcome to The Voice of Reason, Chloe Castillo. She's America's Pianist and is joining us as part of our artist series here at the network. So happy to have you, Chloe. And please tell us about a wonderful event happening in Westchester, New York on Friday, August 8th.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Great to see you. I am so excited. Make Music Right. It's my new organization. Our launch gala is on August 8th in Westchester, New York. It's going to be a fantastic evening. Laura Trump is going to be headlining the event. My good friend Chad Prather, a comedian and fantastic musician, will also be speaking, as well as Christopher Macchio, the president's tenor, who has, as you know, an absolutely out of this world outstanding voice. He will be emceeing as well as singing some songs for us as well. So it's going to be a star-studded event with great music, great food, and amazing messages as well from all of our speakers.
What's it like, Chloe, to be a creative on the right side of history? Because, you know, historically, our liberal friends have seemed to really dominate that space. But I think as of recently, it's kind of changed its tune. So many more artists out and about just speaking their mind, whether it's about religion or political leanings. And isn't it the way it should be, regardless of your professional background in America?
Well, I will say as an artist myself, I grew up playing classical piano since I was like 4 years old or so. And it was a very liberal environment, extremely liberal. I never really thought much of it as a kid until COVID hit and it all became very obvious to us all. And I would say for conservative artists these days in general, it's still very difficult to become a mainstream artist if you are conservative or hold conservative values dear and are not afraid to promote them. Because the Hollywood machine is an absolute leftist beast, and it is so deep seated in our nation. So it's not something that can be overturned overnight. But I will say I'd like to see cultural renaissance happening in America. I think we're already on our way to in that direction. I think conservatives and Americans just in general are ready for something new and something fresh and something that isn't just full of the same celebrities telling them how to live their lives 24/7. You can't drive your car to work because it's not, you can't have gas, but we're going to go ahead and fly our jets across the world 17,000 times. So I think we're all getting sick of them telling us what to do. At the same time, I think the values that they're instilling in the youth of America is absolutely disgraceful, and it's something that we should be really concerned about as Americans hoping for a better future for our nation. So as far as artistry goes, it's definitely way past time for conservative artists to, be given a voice and to start really promoting their values through their music as well. So I'm very hopeful for these next years in our nation that hopefully conservatives start to take a stance more for these conservative artists and uplift this kind of music.
We feel honored as well here on The Voice of Reason that you shared those gifts with us in the videos that not only playing at the Madison Square Garden with the presidential tenor, as you mentioned, Christopher Macchio, but you picked up classical piano at the young age of 8 or even beforehand because you can play concertos and sonatas. I mean, it's extraordinary to actually watch this footage of you, and you're still young and you still have plenty of time to build on this beautiful career and the talents God gave you. But please tell us who inspired you and how you want to share in that universal language of music with the world.
Sure, absolutely. So I want to clarify real quickly. So I did not play at Madison Square Garden. That was the Paramount in New York. Chris performed at the Paramount. Outstanding performance. I'm sorry, at the Madison Square Garden. That was a video that was put together by someone to kind of integrate the rallies and the YMCA performance. But yes, I loved creating that song for Chris's concert. It was absolutely incredible to create from scratch. But my inspiration, like I said, I started when I was 4. So I think the first inspiration for me was just hearing classical music for the first time and wanting to do the exact same thing. You're a kid and you hear something and you want to emulate that and create something similar. And it just never left me. I was very passionate about it from the start, and it just carried on through all these years. So yeah, I mean, I really truly have a great appreciation for not just classical music, but all art that just has those American values instilled in it. And so jazz has always been a big thing for me. And as far as some inspirations go in particular, I remember as a kid watching like the Janoska Ensemble. This is totally random. They were this fantastic ensemble from Vienna. And I was just like, this is such high level art. I want to create something like this. And so I just kept at it for years.
Such a beautiful story, and it's something that is quite soothing to practice. Do you recommend that people when they're young just to pick up an instrument, because you can not only entertain a room, but we've seen in studies that those who practice and study music end up usually doing better in school and in social settings, because there's something about the brain studying this great art form and this universal language that can transcend cultures and peace movements and really seem to inspire everyone of all different kinds of backgrounds.
Well, I want to touch on that a little bit since you brought that up. I think that music is a universal language, and it's interesting if you look at the mainstream these days, what has become universal, or what we're being told is universal. The kind of ideology that we're being told is mainstream and we should all be relating to is not the kind of ideology or value system that should be, I guess, the structure behind our nation. And so if you take a look at the entertainment industry today, I mean, anyone turns on the TV these days, and unless you're on RSBN, you go to Netflix or something, and it's going to be woke, and it's hard to get away from it unless it's like a specific news channel or something. And so I think that capturing entertainment, again, is going to be incredibly important for getting our country back on the right track. We're already in the right direction. But I will say, as far as the values go in America, music is such a universal language, and it does really soothe, as classical music in particular. It's great for, studying and for the mind and for the soul. There's some great quotes out there. I will say one thing I want to tie in back to, I guess, American politics a little bit, is a John Adams quote that says, our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people and is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And I think that is so important when you think about, well, what does music have to do with America? And, music's just art. Let the artists be their own selves. And then we're going to, focus on politics over here as conservatives. I think it's incredibly important to make sure that we know as a civilization or as a society rather, that our Constitution, the America that we hold so dear, was made for this sort of people. And so keeping that alive within our citizens, within, the people of America is incredibly important. And so, yes, music has a great impact on the soul and on the mind, and making sure that it is, or not that, we get rid of the other stuff, but just making sure that a music, I guess, culture with the values that we hold dear is incredibly important to make sure that can become mainstream as well.
That is such a great point, Chloe, because so much of this world right now, the woke mindset is, this is my truth, therefore, not only should you hear me, but I'm going to push that agenda so much on you that I'll have to change your way of life, whether it's silencing you, getting you fired from a position or a job, just so you can hear my truth, because the way I want it to be, it has to be that way. And of course, America, all about that rugged individualism, yet, like John Adams mentioned, as you stated so eloquently there, that this is for a good and moral people. That's the way this constitutional republic, this foundation, stays together, because our rights come from God, not from government. Can you share with us some of your music inspirations? I see there the late, great Frank Sinatra, Old Blue Eyes, the chairman of the board, a big individual in my own personal music journey. But who got you into jazz and classical music and the study of timeless music?
Oh my gosh, that was my whole childhood. I adore everything Sinatra, everything Rat Pack, big band era jazz, Glenn Miller, all of them, Dean, anything Italian, anything jazz is up my alley. So I would say, as far as classical and jazz, my dad was a huge influence on me. He is not a musician, but he just always played the best music just in our house. And, he'd play something on his phone and say, is this Dean or Frank? Make sure you guess right. And we just had a great time with it. And I was just raised with this, great appreciation for those kind of artists, and I absolutely adore them. That kind of artistry really, I think, embodies true American greatness.
And President Trump loves Dean Martin. He loves Frank Sinatra. You usually hear some of the Rat Pack music playing alongside him, especially along the golf course. So Make Music Right. Can you tell us about this new organization and what you hope to achieve with your work in the music field?
Absolutely. So Make Music Right, comes from a personal place for me because, like I said, I was raised practicing piano, working towards becoming a classical pianist. I was looking to go towards Juilliard, Eastman, Manhattan School, some probably big, New York conservatory, and I was on the right track. And I will say that during COVID, it all kind of came crashing down, not for me as an artist personally, but because of all of the woke, leftist, radical crackdowns when it came to COVID. I was not vaccinated, and I wasn't about to become vaccinated. And I remember calling Juilliard asking, do you require this? And it was yes from basically all the schools that I asked. And so it just made me take a step back in the trajectory of my own, I guess, path that I've been seeing since I was very little. And so it was a blessing in disguise, though. It was a huge blessing because Make Music Right never would have come to be if I had gone down that path. So Make Music Right, our mission is to foster a music culture in America that enriches and strengthens our society. So our vision, we really want to educate Americans on the effects of music and how it shapes people and the effects that it just has on our society in general. And so I think that when people become more aware of the impact that it has on the individual, the more, especially conservatives, will tend to, I guess, want to delve into that a little bit more and care a little bit more about what they're putting into their minds, what they're consuming. You are what you consume. And we talk about MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again movement, and that is incredibly important to speak about. What you put into your body is what you're going to become. And it's the same thing when it comes to entertainment. If you're consuming this leftist garbage, you're going to start, maybe not become a leftist, but your ideology is going to, it's going to shift a little bit. You're going to be more accustomed to it and find it more, at least acceptable or normal. And the normalization of this leftist ideology in our culture is an enormous problem. And so honestly, just bringing Americans back to, again, that root of traditionalism and artistic integrity, and not promoting things like WAP for 4-year-olds, and not promoting, just those kind of I remember, for example, I was at my own birthday party. My friends were all over. I was 16, and my good friend's little sister, I think she was 10 at the time, I asked her, "What's your favorite, artist?" And she was like, "Cardi B. I love Cardi B." And she was singing all the lyrics to me, and I'm just thinking, this is such depravity for a 10-year-old to even understand or to be listening to. And it just really got to me that the kids of America are being exposed to this earlier and earlier and earlier on. We talk about the porn in the schools and the issue with that, and that is, of course, incredibly important that we combat that. But also, what's going into their minds? What are they singing every single day as they, just go to the grocery store? What kind of music is being pumped right into their minds and their souls? So I think it's incredibly important to just bring up the discussion, have these kind of, chats about this. And so Make Music Right wants to do that. We want to provide the resources for people to start understanding this a little bit better, and also just get the conversation started in general.
And some of these timeless stories, whether it be in the opera world to musicals, and even through simple instrumental pieces, transcend that story of love and romanticism and the proper pursuit of man and a woman, and the truth of marriage, as well as we've seen through the centuries. So art has a way of shadowing and exposing truth and really shedding a light on the good, the true, the holy. Chloe, where can we find all of your great work, and how can we come support you on Friday, August 8th?
So you can find me at classically_Chloe on Instagram, and I think it's classically Chloe on other platforms. Make Music Right is across all socials as well, and our website is makemusicright.com. If you go to makemusicright.com/events, you can sign up and RSVP to go to the event. We are so excited about this. Incredibly thankful for everyone who has poured so much into making this launch gala a huge success. And so I am just incredibly excited. Cannot wait to see everybody there. And so yes, makemusicright.com/events. Please get your tickets. We really hope to see you there.
Chloe Castillo, America's Pianist, as culture is simply the downstream of what happens in politics and vice versa. Same with music and the arts. And that's why Make Music Right Again, making a huge difference for this great country. And we thank you for all of your contributions and joining us on The Voice of Reason.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you to Chloe Castillo, America's Pianist, and also founder of Make Music Right, for joining us on The Voice of Reason. And now the moment you have all been waiting for, the winner and the loser this week on The Voice of Reason. The winner is my brother. It's actually his birthday today, July 31st. Happy birthday, Mitch. Very proud of you. A great husband and father, an extraordinary businessman, and someone, although my younger brother, and I hate to admit it, someone I deeply look up to. You are a prince of a man, and what really will make America great again, strong marriages, great husbands, fathers, and people like my brother. So happy birthday. The winner of this week, Mitch McNeely. Now the loser of the week, none other than the police chief in Cincinnati. And you know me, I'm very pro-police. We love the blue on The Voice of Reason. But for someone to come out there and blame social media for what took place with the onslaught and the attack on people who are simply enjoying a summer evening by a mob of thugs. I don't care what color, what demographic, what background. If you simply gang attack people who are out enjoying a night on the town, you need to respond to that appropriately. And most police officers do just that. But for the police chief in Cincinnati to simply sound off on social media influencers and the mainstream media, the legacy, which, believe me, they deserve, and even me, yours truly, your humble correspondent here on The Voice of Reason, deserves a verbal lashing a time or two. I understand that. But if you just watch the videos that were taking place, because all of us have these nifty little devices now where we can take photos and record atrocities and the good things in life, maybe you should think twice about addressing that when being asked questions by the media. So the loser this week is the police chief in Cincinnati. Clean up these cities. And it's a bigger concern for the mayors and those on city councils, mostly run by demon rats for years and years and countless generations at this point. It's time to make our big cities beautiful once again. And that will take the efforts of you living there. Now, this day in history, it is July 31st. And notable because in 1964, the United States lunar probe Ranger 7 transmitted the first close-up images of the moon's surface. Also, in 1498, Christopher Columbus landed on the island of Trinidad during this third voyage of the Americas. And also, a sad note, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, that taking place on July 31st, in addition to the signing of the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, START 1, between the United States and the USSR in 1991, and the first use of the lunar roving vehicle on the moon during the Apollo 15 mission in 1951. That's this day in history, July 31st. Thank you for joining The Voice of Reason. If you like this punchline and politics, sports, culture, music, everything we address here on the show, you can catch us every Thursday night at 6 o'clock Eastern. So be sure to tune in to The Voice of Reason on Right Side Broadcasting Network. We'll see you next week. And until then, be good.